Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Greetings, I'm Mark Morey, and today we're going to be talking about human connection strategies. Have you experienced any of the symptoms of burnout? Any feelings of overwhelm? I'm sure you have. There's some incredible statistics right now called the Great Resignation that talks about 10 million people are out of work, and yet there's some 8 million jobs available. What is that telling us? Well, there is a crack in business as usual. And so I've been spending the last 2 years in my consulting work at Nike and Google and other software companies talking about how we can build a whole different paradigm for humanizing the workplace. I've really been driving to see how we can shift the culture from an old paradigm to a new paradigm, from one that might be characterized as mechanical or mechanistic, being a cog in the wheel, to one that's more of a living system that requires tending and development, learning, engagement, a process that never ends. So, today I want to talk about how this can be useful to you. You might not work in a large company like Nike or Google, but I want to talk about the principles and how you can apply them to your life and to your situation. So, Dan Price, the CEO of Gravity Payments, is the famous CEO who lowered his wages to $75,000 a year and raised all of his employee wages. So people didn't think he was going to be successful. They're naysayers. And I just was reading his quote the other day that was kind of a meaningful kind of entry into this conversation. And he was saying that, workers have awakened to something during the pandemic. They're not going to put up with lousy pay and poor conditions and emotional abuse from their job anymore. But companies are ignoring that revolution and want to go back to normal, back when they had all the power. That's why there's still 10 million jobs open. Pretty simple, he says. And all of the unemployment bonuses, they thought, oh, this is going to change. Well, those have ended, and those numbers are still rising. So what's going on? He says people aren't saying no to your job because they're lazy freeloaders. They're saying no because they're tired of being treated as disposable cogs in a machine for lousy pay with no protections. So he's really just calling it out. We're in a new time. And, there's some things that I want to share with you that make a big difference. And, just some data, like companies that invest in their leadership and in their human capital, invest in their people, they experience a lot of return. One of the resistances is, short-term thinking, short-term profits. We can just replace people. That doesn't retain talent. That doesn't build innovation in the company. It doesn't create trust, belonging, risk, all of those things. So companies, there's some data here that says, people, if you invest in people, they're 2.2 times more likely to exceed their financial targets. They're 2.4 times more likely to delight customers because there's a caring happening. They're 5 times more likely to create a sense of belonging and 5 times more likely to say this is a great place to work. Companies are struggling with retention and attraction of talent. If you lose a major talent in your company, that cost to replace them is like 1.5 times their salary. It's expensive. And it's expensive to go through onboarding, and it's expensive to keep kind of filling positions. So what stabilizes the situation is going to be building practices in the organization that haven't been there before, things that engage in health and wellness for employees. So we're dealing with the Great Resignation. We're dealing with new dynamics of work-life balance because of remote work, business disruptions, and the key, I think, in all of this is that employee resilience is people are struggling. So that's what we're working on here. I'm not going to talk about the company name, but a company that I went into, um, there was a big reorg happening for several years. People were struggling, but not realizing they were struggling. There was kind of a low level chronic stress that became normal. And we wanted to relaunch the org with a new VP coming in. I was brought in to run the retreat and launch an internal program of leadership development. And what we found was that this group of direct reports had never met much. They didn't do any leadership development in 10 years they were there. They were an internal team that wasn't customer facing, so they, were a cost center, but they were also the drivers of technical health in the company. So the executives were criticizing that this team was underperforming, but I'd like to reframe that as they were underdeveloped. So we went on a journey and began building several aspects to build up this community so that they were thriving from a place where they didn't even know they were collapsing or in some kind of go along, get along, low performing mode. So one of the main elements that I work with has to do with a triad of connection. One aspect of the triad is connection to self. So this is the core. It's know thyself. Who said that? Socrates? It's the foundation of any kind of learning, that if we don't have an inner light, an awareness of how we function or don't function, or even just observe ourselves, then learning actually becomes greatly reduced. So that's one aspect of connection. The other is, what drives me? What are my passions? And even more importantly, what's my uniqueness that I'm offering? And what would it be like if a company developed people's uniqueness, not their job title and function, but their originality as part of work? So the second aspect is connection to others. This is the one we typically think of around connection. Um, how well do I relate to other people? There's principles like, listen more than you speak. Be curious, take an interest in other people's lives. Try to find out what they're struggling with versus just talking about yourself. These are basics, and yet they're not that common. And then the third aspect, which is, I think, a really different approach that I don't see in companies much, is connection to nature. And there's a ton of research from my background that I've been participating in reconnecting humanity to the natural world for the last 25 years in communities all over the world, and seeking out wisdom teachers and other cultures and how they connect to the natural world, and recognizing, wow, if we leave that piece out, there's a large question mark around the development of being human, the development of our relationship to life. And, we could say our awareness of climate change, our awareness of larger systems around us they're struggling because of our lack of awareness from that. There's a lot of feedback we're getting from the planet. But at a biological level, connection with the natural world has immediate benefits. We're wired to connect to nature. And it's kind of like leaving really good awareness tools right on the table and never using them. So now that people have gone remote, there's this opportunity to work on all three of those things as part of employee development. So this is what we started working on at this 3-day retreat, the launch of this reorg with the VP. And one of the things that we worked on was, how to engage with each other as a practice, because they're constantly working with their direct reports with problems and transactions. But I was trying to move them into more of a developmental mindset, like how to work with their direct reports from a place of building up their passion, their uniqueness, and their creativity. So it required a capacity building of curiosity. And so we set up these sessions, where I did between the managers, where I said, find out, what it is that they're struggling with this week, and what's one thing that they're really connecting to. And your task as the listener is to only ask open-ended questions. And it's an open-ended question when you don't know what they're going to respond to. You don't know what they're going to say. It's a total blank slate, totally open. What is it that you're learning about yourself today? Would be a totally open-ended question. Typically, people ask questions that lead into either a yes or a no answer or a single word, and then the conversation falls flat. Or worse, it's really a statement, disguised as a question, and there's only one answer. When I gave them that challenge, what surprised me was not how they got to know the other people. What surprised me was this comment a manager said, I just have to say, that's a lot harder than it sounds. I don't think I know how to ask open-ended questions, which was a fundamental self-observing that maybe I don't even know how to be curious authentically. And that was a big bump. I consider that a good moment, because from there was now kind of an agitation of, how do I get good at this? And they said, I've never run a direct report meeting like the conversation we just had. And I'm realizing how lacking I am in actually supporting the humanity of the people I work with. So that was great. I mean, that launched us on a journey. The other aspect that we took a break and said, let's go outside and work with this connection to nature as a resource for your mental health and well-being, because it's natural. And the resistance was like, I don't have time to do this during the workday. Like, I don't get the relevancy. So I said, okay, well, we're going to do this exercise. And this was a team of 15 directors and senior directors under this VP. And we left the gathering room that we were in, went down the elevator, out the lobby, out to this place on the campus that was nice. And it was about a 4.5 minute walk. And we got to this spot, and I said, well, let's just circle up here for a second and take a breath. And we'll just take a breath with me. Like that. And I said, just check in, just notice like what you're feeling in your body, what you're noticing in this moment. If you're uncomfortable, I'm gonna walk you through a couple of intentional mental focuses, and consider this a leadership activity, where you have to shift your mental focus on purpose to something. You're like, okay, so I want you to focus on your senses. It's the most direct route to being present. Those conversations you're in with people, maybe your spouse or somebody, and you're nodding your head, but you actually don't remember or even recognize what it was they just said. You think, oh, shoot, I don't know how to respond. You're not present, right? You can't even begin to help other people or care about them if you're in some fog. So this is a muscle you can build on purpose. So we start with, your ears. I said, focus on what you can hear around you right now. Listen to the sounds. Listen to the diversity of sounds. Go a little further out. Listen to the birds. Feel the wind. Go distant sounds, traffic, whatever. Hold all those, and then we're going to add another sense. Just take another breath. Right, and then I said, now just soften your gaze. Like, look past the circle. Use your peripheral vision. Just allow the scene to go a little, fuzzy. And keep listening to all those sounds. But now just visually watch the leaves move. The wind's blowing the branches a little bit. Just soften your gaze. And then take another breath with me. And then just check in with your body. Just feel your stance on the ground. Feel the ground pushing against your feet. And so we added these senses. We went into smell. You can do taste sometimes too if you have something, coffee. But basically holding all of those at once created this effect of total presence. A little vacation from our mind. And then when we came back from that meditation, so to speak, I said, okay, what are you present to now? We're still standing in the circle there. Just one word compared to when we were last in the office. And they were like, peaceful, calm, relaxed, present, alive, joyful, all of them, unrehearsed. And I said, what are you noticing since you last been there? And they said, this one guy said, I didn't realize how much stress I'm carrying in my shoulders and how much mental stress I'm not even aware of. Now I have a huge contrast. I said, well, it's been 8 minutes since we were in the building. And we did a few other activities. And then we walked back to the building. And I said, now let's go back to what you were working on before. What do you notice about your clarity and your thinking since we went outside and came back in? And this woman reported, I have such a better view on the problem. Even though I didn't work on the problem twice as hard, I now have a fresh perspective. I have so much more clarity and energy to tackle new solutions. So that was a core routine of practice that people could do together, and they could do it in 15 minutes in a workday. I said, how many 15 minutes do you have that are totally unproductive? So there, okay, this is working. Now, what's happening, in these times is that we have a lot of complexity happening. We mentioned working from home is crazy. Pandemic has been crazy. And there's all sorts of other social change, climate change that's been crazy. We're not wired to catch up with ourselves if there isn't some practice of reflection and regeneration. Sure, there's taking time off work, but you come right back into the same challenges, and before long, you're overwhelmed. So I was talking with someone the other day, and we got into this dream, this imagination of what would it be like if peers at work knew how to bring you back to your best self. Because part of what happens is when the tide is rising of overwhelm or complexity and change, and we don't know how to cope with it, there can be a loss of remembering, like a disconnection of our best self. And then we're in some automatic behavior. So maybe a mild addiction or some coping mechanism or avoidance strategy because something else kicks in. We're not really playing our A game anymore. And we're fragmented. So part of remembering, if we've lost our ability to remember ourselves, is to remember, to come back to the whole. What is the whole that we belong to? Think about that for a minute. When you're struggling, where is your attention? Is it internal or is it external? And if it's internal, which it often is, what if you could, through some structure, a check-in with somebody else, or a developmental education session, which I like to call, these community of practices, where you engage in self-reflection and self-remembering, getting yourself back on board with an aim that you live intentionally for the week. That's a powerful way of bumping back into a way of getting yourself back on board versus several days of maybe getting sick or spinning your wheels or maybe taking it out on other people until you realize people are upset with me for being crabby. So once we reconnect with the whole, there's this will that rises to participate in life again. And so essentially building personal resilience at work happens by building community. And in building community, we do that by learning to care about other people. I think that's the sequence. We build community by learning to care about other people, to take the tension off ourselves. And to develop the capacity to care about others, we do that through self-reflection, intentional reflection that has meaningful questions that get us to engage in what's the whole I belong to? How am I interdependent with other things? That could be, the stakeholder group at work, customers, other teams, upstream, downstream. Or it could also include, family and community, the ultimate places of belonging, your geographic place of home, and nature. And that developing self-reflection happens through the structuring, like the culture of a ritualized education process, meaning you get together on a regular basis, not just to have coffee and chat, which is also great, but there's a meaningful set of reflective questions that take place in that group to get you to notice what's shifted lately. Where are you going? What are you learning and growing from? And you can do that with each other. That's called a community of practice. And it's not a training in a sense. It's not something that, it's a program where you graduate or get a certification. It's ongoing because consciousness is ephemeral. Often, I think what it means to be a human being is we struggle with staying present. We struggle with remembering who we are. We struggle with remembering who other people are. I mean, the reflexive aspect is I put other people in a box. You know, what it's like to feel like someone put you in a box of like, this is who you are, this is your identity, and yet you're a moving target. You're always growing and learning, hopefully. Well, we do that with other people too. And if we're both unawake to that, then we're really fostering a culture of stagnation, of status quo. And that's not what's needed today. So this is the opportunity, in the work that I've been working on. And I want to share some more things with you around how we might develop that mastery. There is a company that I worked with for about 4 years developing this process. And we did it at 3 nodal points in the organization. So this is something you can think about. One is we did it with the leadership so that they were instruments for company culture change, if that makes sense, that they were developing themselves because they had so much influence. And between each other, breaking down competitive silos, breaking down kind of that mask of looking good and performance with the executive team. We kind of flattened that group between executive and senior directors and managers. That was important to have at least these timeouts on a regular basis where they were human beings. Then they went back to roles, which is different than identities. Then the other group we worked with was cross-functional team cohorts. So this was, they didn't have a function. We brought them together just for this purpose to build almost like interstitial tissue, like lateral connection across different siloed groups as a way of proactively penetrating different processes in the organization so that it prevented proactively this idea of optimizing your department over someone else's, even though as a whole you're one fluid offering to the world. But people tend to do that when they get internally reflective, or meaning like self-centered. They optimize their department for performance, but the executives are like, yeah, but you're costing other people their flow, so that doesn't work. So we proactively were building a relationship across these different places. And the material, the content we were working on was these, processes of a connection and processes of reflective questions using frameworks of, what's my purpose? What am I struggling with? Here's a framework for thinking about organizing that and how to be a support person to someone else through open-ended questions. We were working on all those things. And some of the quotes that came out of it, I thought I would bring these into the call because often people are like, what are the results? What are some of the anecdotes? One person wrote, mastery of self is important because it allows you to take action and be able to be at peace in any situation. So this is, they really appreciated the agency and the ability to have internal locus of control, to direct their life. No matter what is going around you, no matter what is going on around you, you always have the ability to control what you do and choose how you react and consciously think about a situation. So that was the horizon that they appreciated, that was set for them, mastery of self. And it was a moving target, but when through these cultural practices and support between employees, they were actually bringing that at home, right? The impact of, at the end of the day, how that affected their family was immediate. Mastery of self didn't end at 5. And one of the things that I remember this dad saying was, I spend all day on the computer, and then at the end of the day, I'm so stressed out. All I want to do is play video games and be on my computer. And I'm realizing in this reflective session that my child, my son, is what I care about, and I don't spend nearly enough time with him. In fact, all these nature connection routines, I had that when I was young, and now he's on video games indoors, and we're not spending any time together. So I said, well, what is your aim now that you're reawakening to what's important to you? And he said, I'm going to commit to taking my son outside and showing him the things that I experienced when I was young for my own well-being and for his, because it's good for us, and it's good for our family. I was like, okay. Another quote was, contributing to others or being more aware of others' feelings, struggles, and fears is valuable to me, in that it helps me focus less on myself. Therefore, I'm less stressed. It helps others in that I've had some real personal connections that I wouldn't have had. And I've experienced that as well, that if we can include the people we work with as whole people versus job titles, that we have more understanding of what's going on in the timing of work. There's always timelines and schedules and challenges, but if you only see the transactional aspect, you might get irritated with, why is this not happening, as opposed to what's underneath the waterline of the iceberg of who this person is and what they can bring to the table and how you might want to help them, because there's more compassion and understanding. I mean, it's the speed of trust is powerful when you really understand people, but you have to work on that. So the third quote here is around meaningfulness. They said that meaningfulness is a driving force that feeds into other metrics. When doing something with meaning, it's easier to have external consideration of others and a better sense of accomplishment. Action without meaning produces brittle products, discontent, and apathy. Action without meaning produces brittle products, discontent, and apathy. It's such an exquisite articulation of what a lack of resilience is, and the nuance of meaningfulness there. What is it that creates meaning? Because, psychological safety that came, out of some really great research from Amy Edmondson, that they did a huge survey in Google around this, and they found out that, part of it was being able to share kind of unprocessed things with your team, generate new ideas, kind of take the mask off. That was really important, and not get criticized or judged. And then the other was two different aspects of meaning, that their work was meaningful to them personally, and that their work was meaningful to the company direction. That I have a purpose. I'm serving this company role, and hopefully you align with the company goals. But if you were in a company you really love, but your work, you didn't see how your work mattered to that goal, then meaning drops, and then you start to get these other kind of effects going on in the culture. So I'll just wrap up with a couple more stories, but I want to focus a little bit on an action item that you can do today. You can try something out and work on this. So one of the instruments, the activities that we work on, is gratitude. So in one company that I worked with, we focused in on this because the company in general had a pretty strong family culture, Midwest company, mid-sized company, and also, there's just a lot of great research around gratitude. If you just type in, gratitude at work or the science of gratitude, you'll find no less than 10,000 entries and, 1,000 or 2,000 books on the subject. It's really well researched. The neuroscience is amazing, and you get a lot of immediate benefits being grateful and imagining what you're thankful for. It starts to provoke a lot of the things that we talked about already. But it's a practice. It's something you can ritualize at work. And so we started this process, and started with the managers, and it was a little awkward at first. It's like, how do I do this at work? Isn't that something that should be done outside of work? And we were really integrating and saying, well, what if our culture was something that had that available at any time? We could shift our mindset from complaint to gratitude. How do we become grateful for a struggle that we're in, right? How do we reframe that as an opportunity to grow through gratitude? Because often when we look back at the worst situations we have, they're places that we grew in our life. So while we might complain about it, really it moved us forward. So ultimately, we're grateful for the challenge. So it's just kind of reverse engineering that to the immediate challenge that's unreconciled and say, how am I thankful for this moment? What is the invitation here? So that's a deeper aspect of gratitude and humility, I think, that comes with that. So, we worked on this routine through a number of retreats and these communities of practice that we were working on. And one of the ways they implemented it was during the stand-up. They were like, what are your blockers? What are you working on today? What were you working on yesterday? And what's one thing you're grateful for? You could always pass, but, this was a stand-up of, 80 people in this particular company. And they were just quickly moving through the whole thing that really sounded almost like robotic. When I visited there once, I was like, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. And the COO was like kind of taking notes on the whole thing. But when this gratitude piece got happened, every kind of third person or so, someone we say, it's my son's birthday today, or it's our anniversary, or I came across this beautiful spot in nature where I saw this amazing bird. I'm really grateful for the park outside my house. I'm grateful for my partner. I'm grateful for working here. At any moment, like all of a sudden, there's this huge uptick of smiles on people's faces, like shoulders drop. Humanity has grown in the room tangibly. And so it just became like a living system. Like people would have different things that they would celebrate or just, reflect, and the group would, witness them. On one retreat that I went to, this was towards the end of a long process that we were in, and people went and had a quiet sit. One of the practices is called a sit spot. And essentially that's sitting outside. And if you were doing this at home with remote work times, you would want to keep it close to the house. Find a place you go to regularly and get to know it. Build a relationship with this place. Do your sensory connection exercise there. And you might include gratitude as part of that. What are you grateful for? And your mindset, And then some kind of reflection. What am I learning? What am I noticing? This is a whole routine. So we had done that at the end of a several-day retreat, and they came back to the closing circle, and we went around. What are you grateful for our closing statement? People talked about being grateful for the company for implementing this. People were grateful for coworkers, their family. They were grateful for life, growth, and then this one popped up that I will never forget because it was just so potent. One of the leaders in the company, I was doing some personal coaching with them 6 months prior, and we were just having a session, and she was grumpy and not doing well at work, having trouble focusing, and just wanted to kind of ignore it and move on and say this isn't a good time. And I said, well, maybe. Yeah, we had built a rapport at this point, right? So this is a little deeper cut at what's possible when you have a community at work, when you have compassion. So, I felt my external considering of her rising and in my curiosity. And I said, well, it doesn't bother me if you want to address something, if you want to explore what this tension is, apparently you're struggling. She's like, okay, I didn't want to burden you, but I've been working like 14 hours a day, and my husband's starting to complain. And at the end of the day, I just want to drink, And I said, oh, well, what's going on? And asked, she asked this and said that, and then realized that there was this issue between her mother and her. And this was definitely off topic from work, but it was affecting work. And there was really no one for her to talk to about this, as far as she was concerned, or she just had not. So, in caring about her, she just started speaking into that. Said, well, the issue is that she was doing things with my child that I didn't agree on from a parenting perspective. We had different approaches, and we kind of got into a fight about it, and I stopped talking to her. And I'm really upset about it because I see myself as a family person, and I've just been really struggling around how is my child ever going to have a grandparent? And if this continues this way, and I don't know what to do about it, I'm just avoiding her. And so I would name her as being stuck, in this problem. So we worked on it and, imagined, what would a solution be, because we brought in a framework that we had worked on in our community of practice, a shared language for how to get out of a bind between two stuck things. What's the invitation to grow? And she found something around what she really wanted to say that she wasn't saying. And I encouraged her to take the risk, and she courageously said she would. Now, I never heard what happened at the end of that, and it was a good session all by itself. She seemed happier at the end of it. Well, at this gratitude circle that I began the story with, she said, well, my gratitude is for you, Mark, and for this process of developing a community of practice at work. If it weren't for you asking me those questions with your curiosity and your care, I might not have moved off that problem, because it had been going on for a while. And shortly after we talked, I did go to my mom and we did work it out. And it was a huge relief. It was difficult, but we found common ground, and probably much more common ground than I thought was possible. And all of my performance started coming back at work because I was relieved from that stress. My child was getting more attention. My mother and I were bonded again. But the significant thing for me is that shortly after that, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And this last 6 months, I've spent every day of my life with her, and it's been the best 6 months of our relationship so far. So if it weren't for that moment and for this process we're in, I might not have had that with her. So that's what I'm grateful for. So that's a deep story, but there is real life happening all the time with people, and you might see that in the pandemic. People's struggles are still happening. People's lives are still happening, and we can be a resource to them as part of our caring and consideration. So, you want to try something? Let's do something right now. I'm going to offer you a tool, and feel free to use this proactively. I don't think you have to wait till you're overwhelmed, but if you do it when you're overwhelmed, you're going to notice a big difference too. Sometimes it's just hard to be proactive when you're in the overwhelm, so maybe just go ahead and get it started. But why don't we work with the one where we focus on our senses? You could do it right now, but maybe go outside, where you experience that kind of shift where you're outdoors, you see the sky. There's a natural awe and reverence that can come with looking up at the tops of trees. It starts to shift dopamine levels in your imagination and your body. They say that our frontal cortex can get like a cognitive load that just reduces our ability to take in new information. And specifically, awe and reverence and letting go restores our cognitive ability to take in more work or more thinking. Anyhow, go outside, close by your house, right on the porch, right outside, sidewalk, wherever, and take a breath. Breathe a little deeper than you normally do, right? Start with listening. Engage in the sounds around you. Try to hold as many different sounds as you can at once. Just notice if you lose track of listening, to come back, keep listening to the sounds. Maybe you count them on your fingers. And then while holding that, take another breath. Go to your vision. Now the key here is to hold both of these at the same time. While listening to the birds or the wind or the cars, soften your gaze and look out at the horizon. Look in the distance and just allow your peripheral vision to be active. You can see the sky and earth. You can see things moving, but your eyes are just kind of fixed in the distance. Just let your gaze soften. Maybe look up in the sky. Try to see the whole sky. And as you're doing that, keep your ears active. Now you have two senses going. And then the third sense, which is pretty easy, is like the sense of touch. Feel the ground beneath your feet. Feel the sun on your cheek or the wind on your arm. Feel maybe there's dew in the grass or it's drizzling. Anything that has to do with touch, your clothing. Take a breath and hold all three of those. You might even have a smell. Maybe there's something aromatic nearby. It's the smell of the time of year. Maybe it's a particular plant. You can rub a green leaf and smell it. But you're just engaging in that moment where you have that sensory openness to, what is this new thing? While listening, while softening your gaze, while feeling in your body and smelling, all that starts to give yourself a little mental vacation. And then in that space, just check in with something meaningful. When's the last time you were in a caring place? What do you care about? What is really deeply important to you? And from there, what are you grateful for? See what comes on board. What shift is taking place during this activity, especially if you go from overwhelmed or you're like in the workday and you take this 10-minute break. I'm really curious to see what the effect is for you around returning to work or your cognitive load or how you feel in your body, the value of nature connection. What are you noticing about all that? So there you go. Try that out. See what happens. And, this is what my story is for you here today. There's a lot more, you're probably on my newsletter already, so I'll send out more stories. I have a couple of offerings that you might see. One's called Thrive on Demand, where you can get a whole team to engage in these things in a short little week-long format. And another offering called the Dojo, which is a year-long process. And I do a lot of internal development in companies to create these ongoing communities of practice, building their capacity to be resilient and caring, because that's what's being asked for today. It's kind of the problem is the solution, right? It's our opportunity from this great resignation and complexity that we're in. Maybe what will happen is we'll become more human, more meaningful work. Maybe we'll shift our workplaces. Maybe we'll shift our job functions to something we more care about. But ultimately, we become more present because we have to. As a teacher of mine once said, the greater the need, the greater the result. So I encourage you to have an aim for the week that might come out of this conversation and stay in touch. If you can send me a message about how the use of this activity and tool worked for you, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll see you down the road. Ciao.